from your perspective, do you feel that this deal is a fair one for Israel?
Of course, absolutely. I mean, this I think what's interesting here is the different power relationship between the U.S. president and the Israeli prime minister that did not exist with the three previous American presidents who had to deal with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I think now you've got a case where an American president is able to put pressure on Netanyahu in such a way that he even had to take it, exactly what you just quoted, and even had to apologize to the Qataris for the Israeli strike there a few weeks ago. So this is different. And I just read earlier today where Prime Minister Netanyahu said this was a great victory for Israel and for peace and dot, dot, dot. So I think he recognizes that he has had to change his tune here. Now, of course, he's not happy with it, but I guess that's the nature of any of these negotiations. If you're trying to stop the war, neither side is going to be completely happy with what they had to sacrifice. And in this case, I think Israel recognizes that many of their supporters around the world were starting to change how they viewed Israel, that this is bad for Israel's standing in the world as well. So there's a lot of things at stake.
And do you feel that Israelis had some unachievable war objectives at the end of this conflict during the last 6-8 months?
Look, Hamas is a terrorist organization, and I think what they did back 2 years ago was horrible. But you cannot destroy an insurgency by killing everybody. If we knew for a fact that every single Hamas soldier had been killed, you still have tens of thousands of young men that have witnessed what happened over the last 2 years in Gaza, and their life situation has only gotten worse. So that's not how you end an insurgency, and I think the Israeli government is going to have to accept what previous Israeli governments had always accepted: a two-state solution. That this war is about land, it's not about religion, and the Israeli government is going to have to be a part of, or is going to have to agree to a two-state solution. Now, the hardest part, of course, is going to be coming up with an administrative authority, a government for the Palestinian side that can administer Gaza in a way that brings back basic services. People can try to rebuild a normal sort of life there. And not everybody will be in favor of that. So there will always be pressures, but I think it feels like we're closer to it now than we have been in a long time. And I certainly hope that people realize that this is an opportunity that they do need to seize.
Also, President Zelensky commented on this issue, quote, "Even Hamas is showing readiness for negotiations, but not Vladimir Putin." Do you think that the war in Ukraine could end the way the Israel-Hamas war did?
Well, I certainly believe it could. The question is, should it? I think any agreement where Ukraine's future is not secure is not going to be sustainable. I mean, if Russia thinks they just need to negotiate something and wait for a year or two and then start again, if Ukraine's defensive capabilities and security are not significantly better, to deter that from happening again, I think I could understand why the Ukrainian government would be reluctant to do that. And I don't think that what Putin, you can't, these are not similar situations. I don't think Putin should be rewarded for his attack on Ukraine, his illegal seizure of Ukrainian territory, and the thousands of Ukrainian children who have been kidnapped, and all the war crimes. They should not be rewarded for that. So this is a decision for the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian people. Is it worth it to keep fighting? Is your future secure? And frankly, for the rest of us, we should not allow Putin to be rewarded to keep what he took over the last few years. But again, I would obviously defer to the Ukrainian government, Ukrainian people. How much more can you or are you willing to do this?
Let's also cover our final topic, the recent meeting between President Trump, Pete Hegseth, and U.S. senior military commander. Secretary Hegseth even responded to your reaction on this on X. What does this meeting mean personally for you? What's your take on that?
Well, I have to say that, of course, this was a very unusual sort of gathering. And I never seen something like that where you brought back everybody, all those senior people back for a meeting, unless it was to talk about something like, strategy or whatever. This was not that. But I was proud to see how those hundreds of generals and admirals and top senior non-commissioned officers, how they comported themselves. They were professional, they were respectful, and they were quiet. It did not turn into a political rally. It was exactly what we should expect and what the American people should expect and what all our allies should expect, that the U.S. military is an apolitical institution. Its oath is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And it's been that way since our beginning. And I think that was important for everybody to see that the senior leadership of the military is an institution that is bound to the Constitution, not to any political party or one political leader.
But if you were a four-star general sitting in that room, how would you have felt after hearing these statements, messages from President Trump and Secretary Hegseth?
Well, there's several things that concern me about what was said, about the possibility of using the military against our fellow citizens in cities. Such an emphasis on physical standards that would potentially make it very difficult for women to be able to stay in the military. The way it was conveyed, I think every female soldier in the U.S. Army wants to meet the standard. So that's not an issue. It sounded like there was so much emphasis on things that would drive out or block a lot of people from serving who want to serve, and we would lose their brain and their technical skills. So that just seemed like a bit of a disconnect between what the military requires and what the secretary was advocating. Now, of course, anybody in the military should be fit. I mean, any Ukrainian soldier can tell you that the demands, even if you're a drone operator, you still have to be fit to operate in the field environment for a long period of time. I just thought that this was not the right approach when it comes to that. I think I'm uneasy with the way that they talked about rules of engagement. Rules of engagement have nothing to do with being politically correct or woke or anything like that. Rules of engagement are what help make sure our soldiers that we all operate within legal frameworks. And that's important because it helps make sure we're accomplishing the mission, not just killing everything in sight. And it also gives our allies confidence and the American people confidence. And there is also a psychological burden on soldiers who I've listened to Israeli soldiers talk about this. They care for the rest of their life if they were involved in something that killed innocent people, even if it was an order that they got. That's a psychological burden there, and I don't want any of our soldiers to ever have to deal with that.
Let's cover also new results of Ukrainian deep strike campaign against Russia's oil refineries. Ukrainian drones have knocked out nearly 40% of Russia's oil refining capacity, according to new estimates reported by the Moscow Times. What is your assessment of this, and could Vladimir Putin sustain such pressure for a while?
Well, I think, first of all, this is a brilliant strategic tactic by the Ukrainian military, because this is really hurting Russia. It's not hurting Putin, it's not hurting the leaders, it's not hurting the oligarchs, but it's hurting the common people in Russia, who now can't get fuel. We're seeing pictures of 2 or 3 kilometer queues to get fuel, get petrol in Russia. And I think most significantly, we learned at the end of last week that Russia is now having to import petrol from abroad, which is hugely significant because Russia gets the majority of its foreign currency and the majority of its money to keep its war machine going from selling oil and petrol outside. So now actually, Russia is not getting that money because it can't, and it's having to pay more money to import petrol. So I think this is a absolutely brilliant tactic by the Ukraine targeteers, and it's really bringing the war to the people across Russia who cannot get fuel. And if they can get petrol, it's hugely expensive, and the Russian people are struggling anyway because food is expensive, inflation's high, interest rates are high. This is likely to cripple the Russian economy if it goes on for any significant length of time. And I assume that Ukraine will keep attacking the oil industry, and having destroyed it by 40%, I mean, that's going to take a long, long time for the Russians to rebuild it. So, a very, very smart move, I think, by Ukraine.
Do you feel that this could be the best strategy to bring Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table?
Well, not directly, because I don't suppose Putin buys any petrol himself or his oligarchs, but it is the Russian people. And the Russian people who've been pretty quiet hitherto, back in the 80s, when the Russians lost a lot of people in Afghanistan, the people of Russia marched on the Kremlin and demanded Russia to withdraw. But we know, we've discussed before, Russia has lost over 1 million men in this fight. But it's kept that sort of quiet from the population. What it can't keep quiet is the fact that the Russian oil industry is being destroyed by Ukraine drones and missiles. And everybody in Russia virtually needs petrol to run their cars, and they can't get it. So I think this is, really, really significant. It's not affecting Putin, not directly, but it could indirectly if people suddenly realize that what he's doing is driving the country literally into the ground. And so actually, indirectly, it might well affect him if the people realize this and march on the Kremlin as they did back in the 80s.
Could this also turn Putin's inner circle and oligarch against this Putin's war effort in Ukraine?
Well, I think there are murmurings that there is discontent within this inner group, and there must be. I mean, they realize what's happening here, and they realize, the gold standard of the Russian economy is their oil. That's where they get all their money from, and that it's been destroyed. So it's cutting off the lifeblood. All these oligarchs who get millions and billions of dollars via the oil industry given to them by Putin and elsewhere are suddenly realizing that money is drying up. And actually, the Russian government is having to spend billions to import oil now. So I think this is getting really, really serious for the Russians. And let's hope that Putin has a modicum of sense, a modicum of morality, and decides to come to the peace negotiation table before the Russian economy completely crashes.
Also, it's interesting that yesterday was Vladimir Putin's birthday. Was this a happy birthday, from your opinion?
Well, it was certainly very interesting following it on social media, on X and other places. It would appear that most people in the world did not wish President Putin a happy birthday. Of course, the Russian propaganda machine was in overdrive. But at 73, you would have thought Putin would be thinking of retiring. But I think he's got himself into such a difficult position that, he would not get a happy retirement. So, I think it's pretty clear that most people in the world did not wish him a happy birthday yesterday. And really, the best thing he could do, and let's hope that if he has another birthday, if he, by his next birthday, he's realized that actually the best way is a just peace in Ukraine, and he can focus on rebuilding Russia, which he has pretty much destroyed over the last 3 years.
Don't you think that people around Vladimir Putin were just didn't have any other choice but to congratulate him and wish him all the best, because they just cannot afford to say no to him and are afraid of losing his attention, his friendly ties with him?
Absolutely, yeah. They're all sycophants. I mean, he is a dictator, and they bow to him. But a bit like Julius Caesar and Brutus, it might well be that actually, if they get the chance, they might do what Brutus did to Julius Caesar and stab him in the back. But at the moment, they realise that the only thing they can do is praise him, because as a Russian dictator, we know that he's completely ruthless and gets rid of anybody close to him who doesn't agree. Prigozhin, we remember very clearly, who opposed Putin, and Putin blew up his aeroplane and killed him and his close staff. So, this is a dictator, and hopefully he will meet a dictator's end, and let's hope it's sooner rather than later.
Also, it's interesting that yesterday, during his birthday, Putin held Security Council meeting, very serious meeting with his senior officials in the matter of security. But the main topic which was discussed, for the number one priority of yesterday's agenda, was the security of information infrastructure, something like this. But it's so interesting and funny that the first priority was not the protection of energy sites or refining sites, but the protection of Russia's information infrastructure. What could this mean? Does this mean that Putin is so afraid, so embarrassed to reveal that they have another priorities?
Well, yeah, and interesting that it wasn't protecting civilians, people. I think the whole Russian system runs on propaganda and disinformation. And if that's affected, then that will affect the way they do business. I think it's also to do with the sort of cyber warfare. It was only last week that the previous head of MI5 rather, Dame Manningham-Buller, suggested that Britain in particular was already in hybrid war with Russia, cyber and espionage. And actually, we now know that cyber warfare can be far more damaging than any sort of bombs and bullets and missiles and drones. And Putin has realized that's a real weak point. With Ukraine, with the West's help in the cyber field, could possibly bring Russia to its knees. We've already seen cyber attacks affecting Aeroflot operation, the Russian airline, being unable to fly around Russia, and everything else. Even in Russia, everything is run electronically and via the internet. So Putin is realizing that this is a particular really weak underbelly of his, and he wants to protect that. But I think it says a heck of a lot that he doesn't even mention protecting civilians. Let's hope the Russian people really understand what his priorities are, and they're certainly not the population of Russia.
Also, recently, Professor Michael Clark, Sky News military analyst, said that Ukraine could launch another offensive attack on Crimea before the winter. What is your assessment of such a possibility?
Well, I think it's certainly possible. When I look at it with my sort of military hat on purely, there would appear to be certain vulnerabilities. We know that the Ukraine targeteers have already taken out a number of key radar areas, which would allow Ukraine forces some sort of freedom of maneuver. The Kerch Bridge is always talked about, and it would appear that Ukraine now has the missiles and the drones to be able to take this out. I mean, and certainly if they have Tomahawk cruise missiles, they would easily take out the Kerch Bridge, which would then isolate Crimea. So, who knows? It's certainly a possibility, and I think the main thing, it's giving Russia an awful lot to think about. The Russian army, as we discussed last week, in my opinion, has culminated, has run out of steam. So this might well be a really opportune time to attack, because I don't think the Russian army has the ability to maneuver and counterattack. And if Ukraine can put sufficient force towards Crimea, I agree with Professor Clark that it is potentially something that the Ukraine military could realize. Whether it's this year, who knows, but quite possibly. And I'm sure, like Professor Clark, really hopes that Ukraine could achieve this.
Also, do you feel that this would be a great push to bring Putin to the negotiating table to change this balance on the ground? And would you feel that do you feel that President Trump could be in favor of that? Because according to Wall Street Journal, President Trump has changed his position on Ukraine, because some counteroffensive plans of Ukraine has been revealed for President Trump. He was told that Ukraine would prepare some offensive operations. Do you feel that Trump would also be supportive of such offensives and attacks inside Russia?
Well, certainly, if all those things come together, it's very, very possible. And quite often, the best form of defense is attack. And if Ukraine could recover Crimea, it would massively affect the Russian forces, because all the forces in the Donbass and Zaporizhia and in those areas would have to be resupplied in a much more difficult way. It would make the Russian forces very difficult to sustain and very unbalanced. And if President Trump decides to help and enable the Ukraine counteroffensive to Crimea, I would say it would have a realistic chance of success, and that may well be the catalyst again to get Putin to negotiate, because losing Crimea would be a significant blow to all Putin's aims, and it is probably more likely that Ukraine could retake Crimea rather than some of the areas in the Donbass at the moment.